Good evening, friends. Welcome to the presentation number 10. And we are starting, resuming back where we left. I think we left where the Cain built a city and named it after his son, Enoch. So Cain was the first builder of a city. And then we hear in Bible, the next builder is Nimrod. Nimrod is a very popular figure and lots of legends outside of Holy Scriptures. They deal with him. They have different narratives about him, and he's obviously an emperor builder. But scriptures give very little information, but whatever little information scripture gives is very profound. And I would confine myself to the Word of God, Holy Scriptures. I don't want to take up or go anywhere near the legends. So let's take up this study and primarily Genesis 10. We would be dealing few verses that talk about Nimrod. So let's launch it. Plan for today. The Mystery Babylon. We are dealing with foundational concepts of Mystery Babylon. And then under this heading, we have finished or kind of dealt at a length with harlot, a woman becoming harlot in Bible, and all the symbology, that is Greek word semeion, the symbology and theology of a harlot in Bible. So we went through significant data from different parts of Bible. And then we are currently doing the Semeion and theology of Babylon, that word Babylon. So we're going through the topic, and Babylon happens to be a city, and it is a city in the Old Testament near Iraq. It's called Babylon, city of Babylon. It was both an empire as well as a city in history. But when we come to Revelation, it's becomes a spiritual entity. It's a spiritual city. It's a spiritual Babylon. In fact, by Revelation, we have so much data accumulated, and it is called city of demons. Babylon is essentially a city of demons. Different demon spirits would come and make Babylon their home. So that's where we are going, but we work our way from Genesis and go through all the trajectories that talk about a city. So we covered city of Cain last time, and he named it Enoch. And we find the next builder, city builder, is Nimrod. Nimrod takes this a step further. So if what Cain did was rebellious in the sight of God, what Nimrod does is even more uh, sinister and even more rebellious. So he continues in the same path as his predecessor. In fact, all the city builders are called sons of Cain in a figurative sense because they continue the path that was laid down by Cain. So today we are going to learn a little bit more about the city, what it is, and why city comes into existence, why people would build cities, and what they try to accomplish. What is the inner motivations or motives? So we go through that, and all from Holy Scriptures. And then after we finish Babylon, uh, we would come to the third segment, that is beast. So beast is basically very similar to city, but city is a smaller unit and beast is a bigger unit, but they are almost like parallel. What we learned in the concept of city, later on, we apply those principles, those uh, things that items we have learned, they apply very much to the beast. Uh, but as always, beast is much bigger, much larger, and 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 it is more sinister than a city. And today, actually, Genesis 10, this is wrong. So happens like from the last presentation. We would be dealing only with Genesis 10 tonight, and parts of Genesis 9 we would just refer. There is one reference in Genesis 9. So we have here the mystery Babylon, this slide, and the mystery Babylon is essentially a harlot, a woman who is a harlot. She was faithful to God once upon a time, but now she is a harlot. There is something significantly changed in her internal composition. So she transformed, she went through this breathtaking, tremendous process called harlotry, and she becomes a harlot. And here, the Babylon, an independent concept. It's a city, it's an empire, and it's a state. This Babylon is somehow appears in Revelation, and this Babylon merges with this harlot. That's an interesting combination. When we say mystery Babylon, she is both a harlot as well as uh, a city or an empire. They are fused together, and then it is called the mystery, great harlot, and great Babylon. So both the phrases are used in Book of Revelation. She is not just an ordinary harlot; she is great harlot or mother of harlots. And this Babylon is not ordinary Babylon; it is called Great Babylon. And this code word mystery is used in Book of Revelation. The mystery is Greek word mysterion. Mysterion means very covered or concealed. It is not openly revealed. So somebody has to uncover and unpack. So this is largely concealed concepts. So they're cryptic and they're also very spiritual in nature, and heavy symbology is used. That's why they are mysterious and mystery. And then this combination of Babylon and harlot, she's a woman and she's also a city and empire, and she begins to ride on a vehicle or a bigger, larger entity called the beast. The beast. The Greek word is terion. So on Tyrion, this woman writes, she both sits as well as rides on this beast, and this woman also does sit on many waters, and she also sits on 7 hills. So it's a simultaneously she does several things, and this is a very unique combination of different parts are brought together, and we are talking about a huge composite of uh, several independent parts working together closely, and this is the final end time evil entity, is the villain of Bible, the end time villain that we are talking about, that we are dealing with, and the whole thing is wrapped up, and Bible calls it mystery Babylon. So we're, since this is a composite, this is a bigger concept, We are going with studying of harlot. We did first, and then we are doing the Babylon. Then we will come back to beast, and then many waters and seven hills are somehow related to the beast. So we will uh, try to study those things and get a good insight into this topic. So Babylon is also a city. So a city is also a cryptic word. It is not necessarily a physical city, even though physical city helps us to understand a spiritual city. So it's a spiritual concept and a spiritual construct. So several of the passages that describe the city in Bible, uh, the passages and the verses themselves are quite revealing. They are mysterious, and if we spend time, they're quite revealing. And we will see that tonight as we discuss Nimrod as the second major builder of a city. And he's the first in the history of the world to build an empire. It's a major city. And Cain is the first one who builds city, a single city that is named after his son. But here Nimrod comes and Nimrod builds multiple cities, and multiple cities span across multiple geographical regions. So his extent is much larger and much bigger, and it's an interesting things that we begin to see the verses in Genesis 10 that talk about the work and the cities of Nimrod. They no longer talk about the physical land, or they no longer give us a historical record, and they no longer portray Nimrod as a person, but Nimrod as a type. It's a spiritual cryptic code. We begin the story with a man, but then the whole scriptures would would somehow get enhanced, and they merge with a demon spirit that runs the person called Nimrod. So we are going into a sandwiched approach. There is a spiritual layer. The demonic spirits move Nimrod, and then they continue their work beyond the physical person called Nimrod. Nimrod dies, and but still the work continues, and they build more and more cities, and it is impossible for one man to build so many cities. But scripture tells us that Nimrod is still building all these cities. How is it possible? So those are cryptic statements in scriptures. Then we begin to see Nimrod is not just a person, it's a spirit, and it's a type. It's a bucket in which several people would fall. Several builders would continue work of Nimrod, and Bible in a cryptic way covers all of them under one name called Nimrod. So Nimrod is more than a man. Nimrod is more than a one physical man accomplishing few physical things. It's much bigger and much wider. We see this pattern across so many pages of Bible. For example, Isaiah 14, it begins with Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, and slowly it segues to Satan and still calls him the king of Babylon. So here we have to understand the language of Bible and the symbology of Bible, how it shifts its focus to the realm of spirit, beginning the story with the realm of flesh. So some of these things we would see tonight in the messages. To begin the city, Mystery Babylon is a city. Revelation chapter 17, verse 18. The woman which you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So here in this context, the woman is Mystery Babylon. So Mystery Babylon is called a great city. And here is another statement in Revelation. This is also a mysterious statement. Revelation chapter 16, verse 19. Revelation chapter 16, verse 19. Here it says, when the Babylon is judged or destroyed by God through various agencies, uh, this verse is given to us, verse 19 of chapter 16 of Revelation. And the great city, or that great city, was divided into three parts. And when the Babylon, the great city, was divided and eventually destroyed, something else parallelly happens. The cities of the nations fell. Hmm. It's an interesting extension. When Babylon as a great city falls, the cities of the nations also fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So here, all the cities of the nations are tied up to this great city, Babylon. So when Babylon falls, all the cities of the nations fell. So it's very hard to understand, read this sentence in a physical sense. If Babylon somewhere, if it is located, if that is bombed and nuked, why all the cities of the nations fall? It doesn't make sense physically, but spiritually it makes sense. Because Babylon is mother of all harlots. It has a mother role, and it is in a way a mother city for all the other cities in a spiritual sense. When this mother falls, all the daughter cities also fall. So that is the concept. There is an invisible spiritual link and dependency between all cities of the world. So again, we are not talking about just physical cities, the spiritual city behind each physical city. So we should start our discussion why all these cities, Babylon, everything is happening as response to the Garden of Eden. Let me spend like 3 to 4 minutes of Garden of Eden. This is the place where God created Adam and Eve and placed them right in the middle of the garden on the top of a mountain called Eden. So I went through quite extensively in another presentation. If you have missed that, please go and watch at your convenience. It is titled The Mountain of God. Mountain of God. So I dealt with 5 mountains, but the whole garden in Eden, when man and his wife are placed there, there is something very important that we should understand. They have no fear. Fear. There is no fear. There is no anxieties in either of them because the environment is so secure. There are no predatory uh, animals that would hunt them and kill them. They are not under a fear. And also, there is provision made for them because God provided this garden with full of good food. So they lacked nothing. So their fear of going hungry, their fear of dying because of lack of food or lack of water, that is absent. That is completely absent in Garden of Eden. And then the danger of an enemy, or a predatory animal, that is also absent. And the anxieties that we have in our hearts in this present world, none of them are existing in the garden. And also, they don't have the fear of growing old and dying because they have not experienced death or decay or old age. In fact, this is a picture of eternity because everything is ideal. It's an ideal environment, free of pollution, free of solar and celestial radiation, and they have excellent food, no pollutants in water or food or air for that matter. So they, even though it's a flesh-based life, they would continue to exist if they are in obedience to God. So God and their connection, their dependence on God makes them eternal, almost eternal. You cannot ask more than this. The garden is everything, everything positive. So the main thing when people leave or they are expelled from garden, then they begin to have the first thing is fear, fear or anxiety. And then they become covetous. They want to covet more and more food and store that food for themselves because they're afraid or fear that they may die because of hunger, because of thirst. And then they begin to see the animals are becoming wild and they might attack and kill them. So they have fear of attacking and attackers, attacking agents. And then they are afraid not only of animals, but other men. They might come and kill us. So see the anxiety and fear and extreme greed and covetousness are results of man and his wife being expelled from this secure, safe environment. Because God was their protector, God is provider, and they don't need to worry anyway. To, they don't need to worry at all about these concerns. They don't have any such concerns. Just live joyfully in the presence of God. So when they were driven away from the presence of God, Adam and Eve, the land was cursed. They were not cursed. So the land was cursed. So they have to work very hard and to produce little food, but they are able to endure the curse that was put on land. But they did not rebel, Adam and Eve and their son Seth, and Abel was already killed, and Seth and his descendants, there is one chain, one line growing out of Adam via Seth, and they were kind of obedient to God, and they accepted the curse on the land and the punishment for the disobedience. And as they were patiently enduring the results of the curse on land, they were in a way much blessed. But Cain, on other hand, he killed his brother Abel and he became the first murderer and he shed human blood and and God curses him to be a vagabond and wanderer, and God sends him to a land called land of Nod. We discussed that the story of Cain, and in fact, when God first curses Adam and Eve, they would have sex and produce children. That's an interesting observation people have made. And Cain also, when he was cursed, not just the land, he was curses placed just on him. and he procreated and begot children. And he goes out into a land of Nod and builds a city and calls the city after the name of his son. So when Cain was building the city, he wants to raise huge walls around the city so that he can protect himself from predatory animals, as well as other men and women might come and kill him. So he is afraid first time, and he was afraid that somebody may avenge the blood of his brother Abel. So some of them are rational fears, justified fears, and much of it is irrational fears. They are irrational. It is something in his imagination, the deep anxieties and insecurities that are installed in his heart makes him go overboard and raise walls high, and now he has to take care of his own self and his family and ensure safety because God is no longer with him and he doesn't believe God and he is wandered away from God. So everything he has to do it for himself. His protection, his security, and his provisions, food, cloth, shelter. Everything he has to now take care of it. And the answer to the God's curse is the building of a city. A building of a city. So city was built by Cain to overcome the curse or the effects of curse. The effects could be real or imagined or exaggerated within himself. So he responds to this and comes out with a solution called a city. And we begin to see it is not all his own idea. There is a demonic world, and demon spirits also promote these ideas within him. And in fact, this is a very recurring theme when people are moved away from God, when when they are under a curse, direct or indirect curse, somehow Satan dwells there. Satan loves to use them and dwell with them and make them more evil and more rebellious because Satan was first rebel in the entire history of the universe. And guess what? When he deals with human beings who are under curse, he instills and injects rebellion against God. Instead of enduring patiently the effects of curse, they rebel. They rebel. So is that not what God said to Satan after first parents sinned in the Garden of Eden? God said to the serpent, because you did this, you shall eat dust of the earth all the days of your life. So your food will be dust. And God also turns to man and says, dust are you, and to dust shall you return. Without God, every human being is a bag of dirt. You're just dust. So when God is not with them, or in other words, they are cursed, they become food for Satan, serpent. There are all kinds of connections I want you to see. When man moves away from God, he becomes a toy in the hand of devil and demons. That's what we begin to see. There's lots of evidence in Cain, but much more evidence in Nimrod. So let's launch. So the answer is get back to Eden. But instead of going back to Eden, instead of enduring the effects of curse, what they do is they search alternatives. They build cities. So the entire history of city has its beginning in Cain's act. He builds a city. He defies God. God condemned him to be a wanderer, but he doesn't want to be a wanderer. He wants to settle and build a city. He wants to construct walls around him and build homes and extend his family, extend his life. He wants to live eternally, but he realizes he becomes old. Then he wants to live through his children. So children are no longer the God's gift, but he has an ungodly view towards his children. He thought children are extension of himself to extend himself temporally into eternity. So he makes sure that they have all the provisions and they are secure and they continue to grow and multiply. So that's the idea of Cain, and that wouldn't work. And all the builders were sons of Cain and act with his purpose. So subsequent builders of this city. So they start with a physical city, but they do much more profound spiritually. They build a spiritual city. Now imagine when we talk about a city in Bible, we are talking about two layers. The top layer is spirit beings, the demon spirits. There is an evidence that suggests there will be a high ranking demon spirit at the top, and then there are middle tier demon spirits, and the lower tier large number of uh, lesser uh, demon spirits. So they form a pyramid. So this is a spiritual structure and spiritual hierarchy and a spiritual ruling system above the city. And then we come to the physical layer of the city, flesh. You also have a ruler or a builder of the city, and you have prominent men, the top brass working under this man. And then below the top brass, you have various specialized people. You have soldiers, commanders, and you have the civil government, and you have people in the city. So we are talking about two layers. There's a parallel spirit layer behind every city, and there is a visible layer, a physical layer, uh, also in a city. And when God talks about city, or when He pronounces a judgment against city, He is it's an astonishing thing that Bible students and scholars found. God wouldn't mention people in the city for some reason. And he talks mostly about the demonic ruling structure that is behind the city, every city. So when he judges or when he talks about a city, he almost always refers to the demonic component behind the city. But the people themselves are kind of ignorant and they don't know that they are manipulated to rebel against God and to build these cities. And God still wants to redeem these people. So when he judges mostly the spiritual layers and physical layers. Still keeps them open so that when he sends forth his son, he might redeem them to himself. So we see grace of God and we see the goodness of God towards human beings uh, in several of these verses that deal with city. So here we talk about the next builders, and they have the same purpose, the rebellion against God, and they want to minimize or eliminate the curse or the effects of divine curse. And they come up with their own solutions under the guidance and the promptings of demons. You should never eliminate Satan in these cities which men build. Men might think that they are building independently, but they are being enslaved to this demonic world. That's what Bible is very clear as we go through these verses. And the next builder we hear of is Nimrod. First, on the earth to become a mighty man. So here Cain built just a city, and Cain killed his brother, no remorse, no regrets, no repentance. He hardened his heart and built one city, and we don't hear much about Cain uh, after that. Just a reference to Cain in New Testament, few, but mostly Cain's work is done. It's done in a very limited way, and he's just the person who did the foundation for a city. But Nimrod takes it much further. He expands. He becomes a mighty man. Hmm. What the word mighty man means is much stronger, is beyond human strength. He has some extra natural strength. He becomes a strong man, and we begin to explore this little bit further. And we know very little about him, that is Nimrod, but we do have one essential piece of information, that is, he was a son of Ham. Remember, Genesis 10 is called Table of Nations. After the flood, we are left with eight people: Noah and his three sons, three daughters in law, and Noah's wife. And from there, the whole mankind gets multiplied. And then we have Table of Nations, where every man is head of one branch that is going to be branched about. So from Noah, three sons, one of the sons is Ham. So Ham was cursed, and out of Ham we have Cush, and from Cush we would have Nimrod. So verse 6 of Genesis 10, the sons of Ham are these: Cush, Mizraim, and Phut. What is Mizraim? Mizraim is another name for Egypt, the Hebrew name for Egypt. Cush, Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. There are four sons. And of the sons of Cush, these are so and so. And Cush, the Cush begot Nimrod. So we have Ham, Cush, and Nimrod. Grandfather, father Cush, and son is Nimrod. And he began to be mighty one in the earth. It's a strong one. Perhaps he's 7-footer. Perhaps he's strong. Perhaps he's stronger than other human beings because of some demonic activity. and he is exceedingly strong, and one man that is very strong, very powerful, but utterly lacks character and restraint of God, you can only expect evil and much evil. The power without character is a ripe scenario for much evil. So that's what we are going to see things unfolding. And Ham, the impure son, because curse lands on Ham. Ham, the impure son, he sees the nakedness of his father. When Noah was drunk and lying bare, Ham goes and sees the nakedness of his father. So he was cursed. Noah wakes up and curses Ham, his son, and in fact, he curses Ham that you would be slave to other two brothers and their children. So the slavery is the curse. God curses. Actually, Noah curses, but God honors that. So here we are talking about people who are cursed. Just like Cain was cursed. When he was cursed, he couldn't bear the effects of divine curse, and he goes and builds a city and finds an artificial solution for himself. He kind of builds a cocoon around himself and attempts to shield the wrath of the curse of God, but he can't do it for long because God would visit with judgment. All these artificial constructs that people build, they are called city, and the cities would only last for some time until God visits with a judgment, a devastating judgment. That will be the end of the story for that city. We see this end of the story for several cities at several times throughout the history of Bible. Uh, but at the one ultimate end time scenario, we see the Babylon as the city of demons would be completely wiped out, would be destroyed. So that's where we are going. So the Ham, the impure son, one who disobeyed one of God's fundamental laws, and the one upon whom a curse was laid. Once again, the city is to follow upon a curse. So this is a pattern we are seeing both in Cain as well as the descendants of Ham. This curse, the city is follow up upon a curse, and as the act by which man tries to escape the curse. So, in order to escape the curse, they seem to build the cities. We are seeing a second scenario that is being repeated. That curse weighing down the shoulders of Ham finds its immediate response in founding of the cities. From the very fact that the he is condemned to slavery, he will become powerful and his power will assert itself in building cities. So, if God pronounced that you are going to be slave and all your descendants will be slaves, then what is the immediate reaction? You don't like to be a slave and you detest and resent that curse that has landed upon you. So the natural reaction is do opposite to this slavery. You become more powerful and subdue other people so that they can never come to you and conquer you and make you a slave. So there is a fear that you will be a slave. In order to counter that, you subdue and enslave other people. See this how the cities are built. City, there is an underlying motivation to avoid curse, especially in case of Nimrod and the descendants of Ham. They are fighting against slavery. And Genesis chapter 9, verse 25, we see, and he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. So you have Canaan cursed, and Ham was cursed, and the Nimrod also would be cursed. So, what is the reaction to this divine curse? We begin to see once again, city building is man's response to God's curse. So I'm repeating this so many times because it registers well with us, the pattern. The city building is intimately, inextricably tied up to God's curse. It's a response to God's curse by men under the influence of demons. Demons probably wait for a very long time until God's curse lands on a people and then they get activated and they begin to do their dirty work and make them build a city. They may or may not build the physical city, but there is a spiritual city definitely being built and organized by this group of demons. So there is a spiritual city behind a physical city. We see that man's power is the result of hardening his heart against God. This is this is also one of the important New Testament theological statements. The hardness of heart comes through deceitfulness of sin. Man hardens his heart in rebellion against God. But Adam and Eve and their son Seth, they endured the curse on the land. They endured the effects, the ill effects of a curse, and they somehow survived. But the others who rebelled against the curse or the ill effects of curse and under the guidance of demons build a city and a civilization that revolts against the curse or against the will of God, they would reap bitter consequences and and a devastating judgment from God. That's where we are beginning to see. So the hardening of his heart against God and under the influence of demon, man affirms that he is strong. So and conquers the world, builds cities until God comes to judge the world. So there is a one end time final judgment for the end time Babylon, but we see intermediate final judgments of many cities one time. And once God judges those cities, uh, like Sodom and Gomorrah. Those cities were destroyed by God. We don't hear of them again unless we have spiritual Sodom and spiritual Gomorrah in New Testament and Book of Revelation. But the physical cities, once they meet the final judgment of God, they are done. They are toast. They no longer uh, rise again. The city of Jericho also meets its final judgment from God and they are done. They are no more rise. So we see this pattern of God's judgment on cities also, along with why the cities came in first place and why they incur a greater wrath from God because the revolt. The revolt. And there is a verse in Old Testament that says that that rebellion is witchcraft. What is that? The rebellion against God, this kind of rebellion is always associated with witchcraft. What does witchcraft means? Satan and demons. Everything is connected to everything else in Bible. Every concept is reinforced and complemented and supported by other concepts from other portions of Bible. When a man is faced with a curse, he answers. This is the normal human reaction, and of course, coupled by demons. I will take care of my problems alone. I don't need you, God. I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need your grace. I don't need to wait for your son, your solution to our problems of being cursed. But I will solve with alone myself. I will take care of my problems. This is the underlying thought, underlying foundation for a city. And he puts everything in his hands to work, to become powerful, to keep the curse from having its effects. In other words, this is very modern type of thinking. You take control of yourself, man. You take control of your life and you set your life in order. And every bad thing that you are afraid of and every bad thing that is about to fall on you, become more powerful and overcome those things and secure yourself by building a city, a spiritual or also could be a physical city around you. And he creates the arts and sciences. He raises an army. He constructs chariots and he also builds cities. So he creates an environment like Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden, there is non-stop entertainment. Every day you might discover a new creature, new butterfly, new pattern, and new wonder in the Garden of Eden. You can't have that in a cursed state. So you produce arts and sciences which would never kind of satisfy you, and you raise an army to ensure your security, which in garden God took care of your security and safety, and he constructs chariots because he has to invade and plunder and rob the food and other good things from other people so that he's safe and secure, and he builds cities where he takes refuge, and his place of refuge is his city. He secures himself against enemy, but he would go out and plunder others. And the demonic spirit of might is a response to the divine curse. Here is what we are seeing as a response of demonic spirits to God's curse. And then might never ex- this spirit might never exist had there been no divine curse. This is an observation. These demon spirits wait, they are powerless because they can't move and toss around human beings to build a city of rebellion against God until God comes and curses a group or a man, and then they seem to get activated. One day that curse bursts forth for all to see in an event that is understood as forewarning sign given to the earth as last judgment. So when once the demon spirits come and influence and animate people, they begin to build cities, but it takes a long time for the whole thing comes to fruition. They become prosperous, wealthy, and secure and safe. They become proud and they don't need God because they have their inner motive of let us build everything away from God. We don't need God telling us anything, or nor his prophets and teachers tell us how to conduct our life. We are independent. That's what man thinks. So this grows and grows, and until their sins are ripe and their cup of sins, that cup is full and overflowing, and God remembers this evil rebellious city and he brings judgment, and that is the end of the story for that particular city. So the curse that bursts forth, if it is not endured, but if it is responded with a revolt by building a city, then you would have a devastating last judgment. This last judgment is very important concept. Whichever cities have met their last judgment, they never rose again. And here in verse 9 of Genesis 10, here we have an important piece of information about Nimrod. He was mighty hunter before the Lord. He was a hunter. We don't know whom he is hunting. It is assumed he's hunting animals. He was a great hunter, at least was what English Bibles tell us, King James. He was mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So the word hunter is Said in Hebrew, and the translation is disputed, and we would shortly see an alternate translation, which helps us to uh, with a greater insight into this verse. So he is hunter before the Lord. Why before the Lord? What if he is a hunter? And if he's a hunter or not a hunter, how would it make a difference to God? Why is this phrase, he's a hunter or a great hunter before God? Before God, this is all trivial. Whether you are a hunter or not doesn't make any difference to God. Or if you are a great hunter or a lesser hunter, also is a futile, is a silly before God. So why God, Lord, is brought in this sentence when we the verse is describing Nimrod. Nimrod is a great hunter before the Lord. So let's parse this phrase, a hunter before the Lord. What is the Lord doing here in this verse? Why even Lord is brought here? Of what concern is it to him that Nimrod was a mighty hunter? What does it being situated before the Lord? If he is before the Lord, how does it make difference? If he is not before the Lord, how do we understand of him being a hunter, him being before the Lord? So something more is actually happening in this sentence. If we go or attempt to go with the alternate translation of this word, Said, and it is a common expression to indicate man before a Lord who is judge and sovereign. So when Nimrod is placed before the Lord, we are talking about two things: the presence of man before God and also separation of man from God. God is a judge and sovereign. He's absolute. There's nobody above God. He is the sovereign and the judge. So all the acts and actions of Nimrod are before this great judge, sovereign judge. And this is God of terror, to whom offerings are brought, before whom earth is silent and powers crumble to dust. So you're doing your hunting before this awesome, mighty God who can just bring you to nothing or to dust. All your power will crumble to dust. So we are beginning to see why that sentence, Nimrod was mighty hunter before the Lord. He might think he's a mighty hunter, but before Lord, he's nothing. And God would judge him. The phrase before the Lord indicates both presence and separation. Presence in this sense is in under the radar of God, under God's judgment. And separation is not like God. He's not under approval of God, but God is ready to judge him. He is in revolt and rebellion against God. He just happens to be before the Lord, but he's against the Lord. That's what it means. We learn that Nimrod's action is neither neutral or nor indifferent, but God has his eye on him. God is watching him. As soon as his cup of sins are full, God would unleash judgment, final judgment. Every city would meet its final judgment once and only once, and the city is no more. A better translation of the word side is plunderer or conqueror. If we go with alternate translation, instead of hunter, if we go with plunderer or conqueror, the whole scenario now changes. This guy, Nimrod, is plundering and looting and conquering, and most likely is murdering and killing, just like Cain. Cain just killed his brother Abel. Now you see unleashing of terror in much bigger magnitude when we come to Nimrod. He's a plunderer and conqueror. He loots everything and he amasses. The spirit of conquering might before the Lord. So the spirit of might is taking hold of Nimrod before the Lord. Nimrod is not only animated by the spirit, but also he puts it to work. That means Nimrod yields to these demonic powers, and it is impossible outside of Lord's presence. So all this demonic work and the man's work in cooperating and yielding to demonic forces, they are all within the perception or the presence of Lord. You cannot escape God's watchful eye. That's why Nimrod is a mighty plunderer or a looter or a conqueror before the Lord. Now the verse makes much sense. The establishment of the first empires, military conquest. This is where Nimrod begins, the military conquest. All this takes place in God's presence. But what separation from God's will? It's not according to God's approval or God's favorable will. It's in rebellion against God. Nimrod's power will be established not only by his plundering, but by his cities. The plundering gives wealth, and the cities provide a refuge, a storehouse for what he plundered. That's how he becomes a great man. See, the all these things work hand in hand. Demons and the cities and the military conquest. The military conquest, the plundering and looting of people, other weaker cities, and robbing their wealth. Historically speaking, let's see verse 10 and 11 in closing. Genesis 10, chapter 10, verses 10 and 11. And the beginning of his Nimrod's kingdom was Babylon, Erech, Accad, and Calneh, and the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asshur and built Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah. See how many cities this guy builds, and it spans across multiple regions. He builds Babylon. In King James it says Babel, but in Hebrew Babel and Babylon are same words, supposedly. So I put Babylon and Erech. Erech is more like Iraq and Akkad and all these bigger cities and Nineveh, the Assyrian Empire, somewhere away from land of Shinar, and their cities are also attributed to Nimrod. How is it possible that Nimrod could build so many cities in his lifetime? Historically speaking, Babylon and Nineveh, these are two major cities, and all other cities are not constructed by one man. If you go through history, you have several people building, different people building these cities. But our text is not meant to give us historical information. It is about cities, not people. So, what is happening here, verse 10 and 11? This is very interesting things are written here. Even though Nimrod is dead, Nimrod's work is continued and carried out by the same set of demon spirits which first possessed, kind of animated or possessed, we don't know for sure, Nimrod. Now, the word Nimrod is not only used for the physical man, but also that word is now enhanced and now describes all the demon spirits that worked with Nimrod. Now, Nimrod is those demon spirits which continued their dirty work of rebellion against God, and they built Babylon, Nineveh, and Erech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar, and they built Asshur and Rehoboth and Calah. How many cities were built? And actually, verse 12 adds few more cities, and all these cities were continuing. So, historically, verse 10 and 11 are, are not historically accurate. He never built, Nimrod never built so many cities. It is multi-generational work to build these cities. But the way these verses are written were not to give us a historical or archaeological information, but a theological spiritual, prophetic insight into these cities. All these cities were built by a group of demon spirits called Nimrod. So Nimrod is much more than a person, and his work, Nimrod's work, is not limited to physical Nimrod's city, but all the host of cities across multiple regions are now considered as work of the spirit entities called Nimrod. This is a standard way of beginning with a physical flesh and blood human being, and scriptures slowly segue into the realm of spirit. The demonic spirits are continuing the work. Meanwhile, God keeps on referring to the cities and cities, not never people inside the cities, for this very interesting reason, because God would redeem sometime in future. At least that's what God's desire is, to redeem the people. When he curses the city, he is primarily addressing to the city as the spirit beings or demonic spirits, rather than the physical flesh and blood human beings within that city. So this is another pattern we have seen. Finally, a clear pattern is discovered. Infallible consequences of his first acts, the spirit of might, conquest, and construction of cities. This is all the work of demon spirits, but the people that are cursed also part and parcel of this work. The city is thus tied with the will of man, and a step forward, the city is now a center from which war is waged. City is where you can hide yourself when enemies come because it is well fortified. But city also helps you to build the ammunition, technology, and armor and go and invade and conquer other cities, the weaker cities, and to plunder their wealth, plunder their resources, and bring them back to your city, and you are happy man, because now your deepest anxieties, deepest fears, that you go hungry, that you go thirsty, or somebody might kill you, all those fears in its own imagination, man thinks that they are all resolved. Now I am a happy man. Me and my city, we are happy. We live here forever. And we are like in Garden of Eden in our own imagination. But they have bad news. One final judgment would come from God Almighty and correct them and correct their thinking that it is not the Eden, but this is just an imaginary work of men under demon spirits. Brethren, this is what we are heading towards book of Revelation, where the ultimate city, that is Babylon, a city of demons, will be judged by God. But the men within the Babylon, God still pleads, come out of her, my people, come to me and be saved. Come to me, the real author of Garden of Eden. Come to me. Here is my son I'm sending forth, who would lay down his life for, for the forgiveness of sins and life of many. So God still pleads with the cursed people, but he destroys and pronounces judgments against cities. It's an interesting distinction between a city and its people. Its people, God's grace is still holding on them. But the cities themselves, which we understand as demon spirits, the judgment is waiting on them. That brings us to the end of the presentation for today. Thank you for watching. We will open the room for your feedback, insight, and would love to hear what you think. Yes, Chris, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you for the presentation. It's awfully good to see you. Hope you and Rupa are good. I I've often wondered about this connection around the term mighty men. It's always been a mystery, and I think it's for a lot of people it's some kind of a I don't know what. It intrigues people, but there does seem to be some alignment with the mighty men in Genesis 6, and it says they took wives of men, etc., etc., and there were giants or mighty men of renown. And that's in Genesis 6. And then, of course, the flood comes along, and it appears that Ham, which is the middle son of Noah, seems to still have some genetic material that would produce a mighty man in Noah, or not in Noah, in Nimrod. And, a fierce hunter, a tyrant, etc. There was a lot of reference to not only being strong and large, but, also being kind of a tyrant. And then we see some of the same things in, further on referencing, the giants in the land and Nephilim and the Anakim that Joshua had to, depose. And he didn't kill them all, but he got most of them. And then, of course, the mighty men of David. I don't know if it's the same, relative genetic and, connection, or is it, just the fierceness and the size? But, it's obvious that strong men, big, strong men tend to have, a fierce power over people who are just not as strong and powerful. So I don't know that that means they tend to build more things, and it's just a fascinating connection. But I wondered what thoughts you had on that line of reasoning.
Thank you, Chris. Both of us are doing well, and we're right now in Houston, Texas. Uh, the word Anakim is translated traditionally as giants. Uh, Obviously, there are two schools of thought on that. One is genetic manipulation, demons mixing with human flesh and producing giants. That's one school of thought. Second school of thought is uh, sons of men marrying, sorry, sons of God marrying daughters of men. So that's the expression which led to uh, these controversial opposing beliefs. Sons of men in Job, book of Job, they're referred to the angelic beings because sons of God shouted when God made the earth and the human beings. Uh, so sons of God is assumed to be angels from that verse. And so the angels seem to be in Genesis 6, chapter 6. They married daughters of men. So that verse is interpreted that somehow these angelic beings, most probably demonic beings, they came and had marriage with human female population, woman, daughters of men. So sons of God is a spirit, and daughters of men are flesh. So there is some kind of sinister thing that happened and produced giants. Some are 7 to 8 footers, and people were dreaded, and that led to these civilizations, empire building, and plundering and exploitation. All the evils that we see today in the world are supposedly originated according to one school of thought, but the second school of thought is completely different. They understand sons of God is very different. They understand them to be human beings, and they come from line of Seth. They still hold some relationship with God because they accepted the curse on the land and they endured that curse. So they're supposedly right standing with God. So God's uh, grace in much abundant way continued with them, and the priesthood, there's a priesthood uh, from Adam to Seth, and to Seth to some people down the line, all the way to Abraham. So it is believed that there is a line of priesthood is continued until Shem. So those are called, again, this is the second school of thought. They think those are the sons of God, while the Cain started building the city of Enoch, and his progeny, his descendants, are extremely wicked, and they are born to a murderer, and those kind of traits still continued with them, and they are much more violent and wicked, and an expression daughters of men is used for them, and it apparently there is no direct verse in Bible. God wanted a separation between children of Seth and children of Cain. Remember, Abel died without children, as much as we understand. So these two branches are continuing to be separate, and they are multiplying and growing independently of each other. But as always happens, the bad guys come in contact with the good guys, and instead of bad guys becoming good, it's always good guys become bad. So this infection continues from camp of Cain to camp of Seth, and that is figuratively referred to as sons of God marrying daughters of men. And the whole, both the camps became extremely wicked after a few generations. And that is the reason, according to second school of thought, that God brought this flood and decimated. And Noah and his sons, 8 people, he begins the civilization, humankind, again. That's second thought. So it's up to you which school you want to subscribe. Uh, they're equally plausible. But I kind of side less with the first group, because the spirit beings cohabiting with flesh beings, uh, it's nearly difficult or impossible, because Christ made one sweeping statement: that which is born of flesh is flesh, that which is born of spirit is spirit. So those are two independent levels of existence, and probably intercourse is not possible between the two layers. They're essentially different, and each can influence, like spirit world can influence heavily the physical world, but the way the first group understands Genesis 6, uh, they more questions they need to answer. That's where I want to leave. Anybody else has any other answers we would like to hear? I'm sure Chris would appreciate any other thoughts on this Genesis 6.
Well, I just to interject real quick, I subscribe to your opinion as well. The second, in that I don't think there was, you know, angels, marrying and having children with physical women. That's clear to me that God did not want that. But I do think that the overall lesson or message I'm getting from it is that, Noah, being a mighty man, was definitely going away from God and rejecting God. And I think he wanted to make a name for himself. And I'm sure this is kind of where you're going to be going. But, he was strong of his own accord, and he was mighty, before the Lord, like before. I'm going to put myself before the Lord and make a name for myself. And it's interesting if you compare Noah, who was a righteous man, but he was not mighty. He was a farmer, and he was a builder. And then Abraham, dwelled in tents. They were not in cities, but they were righteous. So, I think the connection, or I guess, overarching message is that, and Nimrod took it upon himself to be great physically, but God says that, it's my strength, not yours. In weakness, I make you strong. So that seems to be the the overarching message I'm taking out of that whole thing. Anyway, that was just my opinion. Thanks.
But to add another thought, Chris, the same results of giants can be accomplished either way, not necessarily through sexual intercourse, but they can possess the human being and make him a giant out of him.
Oh, yes. Right.
That's entirely possible. So we can have same effects. Either you subscribe first school or second school. So I often think about that.
Hmm.
Uh, there is a scriptural example, Chris, Samson, the judge. Samson would go about his way. Often Holy Spirit comes and holds him. And when Holy Spirit moves him, uh, he would rip the uh, lions with bare hands. He would just kill lions. He is more powerful than lion with bare hands when the Holy Spirit falls upon him. So we have examples that spirit world can empower, make a giant out of man. And if God is able to do that, uh, there is always possibility that demons could also do that. I think we cannot discount that fact, even though we
Sure.
are not 100% sure.
Sure. Well, yeah, even King David, or David before he was king, slew the giant, and with a stone and a sling. He was the only one that stepped up to defend Israel and God, and he was, going against a giant. So it seems to be a continuing theme. But I do appreciate your perspective. Thanks.
You're welcome, Chris. Any other uh, thoughts, comments on tonight's discussion on Nimrod? This is only part one of Nimrod. I will continue the cities that he built, and each city brings in a story, a different story, a rich set of facts. So we will survey those cities which Nimrod built, and it gets more interesting. Let's go to Tom.
Yeah, good evening again. Um, I was thinking more towards, I was leaning more towards the situation where you mentioned that it was the sons of God were the demonic, the demons. It ties back to Genesis 3:15 where it talks about the seed of Satan. Somewhere along the line here, we had to have the seed of Satan uh, brought forth. And it's my, I guess, more recent thoughts about it were that these were men of renown. It says it's uh, very much different. It's not when it talks in the Bible that angels don't marry. It doesn't say they can't reproduce in some form or other. Uh, so that there are powerful men of renown. It talks about the Nephilim, giants, hybrid beings. Doesn't mean that either that these they got killed off, I believe, in the flood, but afterwards they could do the same thing over again, where they reappeared after the flood, where they did the same, repetition of what had happened to them, the sons of God going in onto the um, sons of men, or daughters of men rather, repetition of an earlier event. And if you see in Numbers 13:33, it talks about we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and Deuteronomy and Joshua both talk about Anakim and Rephaim, They're very large people. And of course, 1 Samuel 17 talks about Goliath. So you have a lot of different places where you have this kind of being that is created, and it could very well be, from the seed of Satan. You had mentioned how evil they were, and I think that there's some basis for that anyhow. So I'm leaning more towards that direction at this point in my life. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong, just where I'm coming from, I guess. And that's all I got to say about that.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your viewpoint. Genesis 3, God clearly tells serpent that I will put an enmity uh, between your seed and her seed. So there's a seed of Satan and there's seed of woman, Eve, and the two seeds. And again, coming to Nephilim, these all the effects that we are talking about, they are entirely possible. And I think it boils down to how we interpret these phrases and sentences. And however you interpret the effects and the final results, we all seem to agree. They seem to have some supernatural strength. And Christ kind of opens a crack and kind of in a very very obscure way he opens up, picking up the concept of seed of Satan. Uh, he explains a little bit mysteriously, but if we spend some time, that might help us. Because when Pharisees were trying to kill him, he said, I mean, Pharisees decided to kill him and they decided to murder him. And he could have said, "You murderers, you wanted to kill me." Uh, that's not what he said, even though that is included. You are murderers. But he linked them to their father, devil, Satan. You are of your father, devil, because he is the murderer and liar from the beginning. So the murder and lying that comes from Satan, and then the human beings seem to be puppets in his hands, are willfully or unknowingly yielding themselves to their father Satan. And he was pretty plain that you are children of your father devil. So I think that's also throws some light on seed of Satan, seed of serpent. And honestly, I don't see Pharisees as 8 footers or 7 footers, muscular, strong. At least I don't see that description. They're like any other men and woman. But Christ is now putting them in the bucket of seed of Satan, seed of serpent, because they wanted to kill him and refuse truth and resort to lying. So that's another area. I'm just putting these things, some we have to still fathom and explain and spend some good time to understand these concepts a little more. Uh, I think Christ is the central author of everything. We must begin with him and end with him. That might help us. Uh, but do you see Pharisees are extremely strong and with supernatural muscular strength? And in chat room, Rita says there is a disease called acromegaly caused by overproduction of growth hormone, typically caused by a benign pituitary tumor. Interesting. Uh, Again, these are subjects uh, is more dependent on how we interpret the verses. Is this growth hormone caused by a demonic spirit? Could that be a connection? Uh, Good insight. Uh, let's go to Marlene. Marlene, good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, there's a bunch of scriptures here been tossing around trying to figure out. What about John 6:70, where Jesus said, "Have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil?" Is he actually calling him Judas, Satan incarnate, or is this, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's again loaded verse, but excellent cross-reference, Marlene. He is called devil, but prior to that, uh, I mean, in the Passover night, he said, Satan, scriptures says Satan entered into him at that point. There was no evidence that Satan was already in him prior to that. And based on Christ's statement, Satan was already with him in some form even before he chose him as one of the 12. Did I not choose you 12 and one of you is a devil? So, so those are kind of uh, intriguing, mysterious verses, but we have to bring in other sayings of Jesus in order to properly interpret and understand uh, the isolationist silos. If you take only that verse and nothing else, we tend to go in error based on my experience. Uh, he says things in quite isolated silos, and he expects us to bring all his other teachings on the subject and bring them and harmonize them uh, to better understand. Uh, this is very classic of his teachings, so that you don't find any understanding if you stay superficial. You need all of his teachings and in-depth understanding of all of them, uh, individually, collectively, harmonizing. He comes as a package from Father. All his teachings come as a in a form of a package. Uh, so if you don't have that approach of package, what we do is we pluck individual threads and struggle with that and go in tangents. So when he says to Judas, referring to Judas, one of you is devil, I think that alone, that verse alone would not reveal reveal much unless we come to Pharisees when he says, "Your father devil," and your father is devil, you are also devil. The word father is again he uses in a more spiritual, figurative sense. You are a product of your father, or you are a little father of whose children you are. So he told also Pharisees that you say, if we were alive in the days of our fathers, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. Then he said, you make yourself sinners and you partake the sins of your fathers by calling them your fathers. Even if you call them who persecuted and killed prophets in the Old Testament, if you now call them as your fathers, that judgment which falls on your fathers also falls on you, because you are making part of them when you call them fathers, because you always fill the measure of your fathers. That's what he said. So the father and children concept, he thinks like children are small miniature offshoots of the father. So Pharisees are all little Satans. So Judas is also a little Satan. Am I making sense? Like if you spend more time connecting his teachings, his concepts, we begin to draw a lot more out of it than isolationist approach. Some people take just one verse and nothing else. I think that's an error-prone approach. What do you say? Like, yes, Tom, go ahead.
Yes, I would agree with you on that. There's where it says that in John 6:70 that he calls him a devil. There's everything that I have in software I've used is leading towards more that the devil entered into him, and that would be in chapter 13:2, where it talks when supper ended. That's John 13:2. The devil having put him into the heart of his Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. And then in verse 27 of chapter 13, and after the sop, Satan entered into him. Then said Jesus unto him, what you do, do quickly. And 17:12, where it says, well, I was with them in the world, I kept them in thy name. Those that thou gavest me I have kept, and then none of them is lost, but the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. So Judas, I think, was chosen to be the one to make it happen. I think his inclination towards carrying the purse and collecting the money, spending the money, doing such, handling the finances, he gave him a lot of problems. And I think he was inclined more towards that, to be susceptible to Satan's pull. That's all.
Yeah, agree with your explanation, Tom. Uh, yeah, he was also stealing the money from the bag money bag he was carrying. So he has already issues with his integrity. And we have the whole concept of black sheep from him. There are 12 sheep, and one of them is black sheep. So, but here we have a man possessed with demons. He encounters Jesus, and then we have description of a man possessed by demons. He was extremely strong supernaturally. He would break the chains with which he was bound, and all the well-built men could not contain him because now he has supernatural strength. He often moves around the tombs, and he takes sharp stones and cuts himself, his body. With the cuts, he's bleeding. So we have scenarios of a man possessed by demons inducing supernatural strength into the host environment, into the man. So man is now demonstrating some behavior and some strength patterns beyond human, normal, natural human strength. So again, this man was not described as 8-footer giant. He's like a normal human being, but when demons possessed him, he's beginning to demonstrate extra natural strength. So I think we have to consider all these scenarios to understand better this subject of giants, both from Old Testament and New Testament scenarios. And Chris says, seems that recurring theme or sign is that human might, Gibar, exercised apart from God, usually leads to Babel, confusion, and pride, and contrasts mighty ones in the earth with those who are mighty in spirit. Yeah, that's good explanation. People having supernatural strength is evidenced all through scriptures. But is it through intercourse, or is it just through animation, or through possession? So those things we have to carefully validate. Yes, Chris, go ahead, please.
Well, I was wondering if in future editions you were going to address the Tower of Babel specifically, and the fact that they were doing things that were probably out of their technological ability at the time. At least that's the way it seems. They were building a tower, and God's comment about, well, nothing will be left beyond their imagination. So I don't know if you're going to go to that specifically in a future, presentation or not. Didn't want to, get ahead of you here. And that's Genesis 11:6. 4, 5,
Yep.
and 6.
So anything about Nimrod? Have you heard anything?
Well, obviously the reference here is that they were building a city reaching to heaven, which we don't see anything like that, before this, but obviously they are trying to build something that could not, that they would survive the flood in, that were, built that high, then a flood, if it ever returned, wouldn't be able to overtake them. They were rejecting exactly what God promised, that he would never bring a flood on the earth again. So they were worried that they wouldn't have their own name and that they would be scattered abroad, which is exactly what he did. And he was probably already thinking about it. He told them to be fruitful and multiply and inhabit the earth. So they were totally denying and going against everything that God blessed Noah with as they came out of the ark. And then when he came down to see the tower, he said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, to build a tower and have a name for themselves. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So it seems to imply that they had, different esoteric knowledge and or secrets that God did not give them on purpose so that they wouldn't do this. And that's exactly what they did. It sort of implies the same thing, that they were probably, supernatural, spiritual influencers, that they were giving them information they shouldn't have had. So Anyway, just to continue with the story, I guess.
Yeah, a good point you raised, Chris. I would briefly touch upon in next few presentations the evolution of technology. So techne and craft, uh, production of tools, and a bigger tool that produces tools. So those kind of innovations happened that really progressed civilization beyond its bounds. So the cities grew and multiplied and became more powerful because of the technology, as you are saying. Some knowledge is given to them. At this point, we do not know God or demons who gave them that knowledge. Uh, Nevertheless, it seems to be some supernatural help with this technological strides and leaps. I've seen few videos on AI, uh, the demonic uh, things behind it. The whole concept, whole foundation was planned some time back for AI, and it's coming to fruition now. So there are thoughts, there are ideas that are in circulation, but with Word of God and Holy Scriptures, probably we should be able to make a good case, a solid case based on truth and facts. See, we are beginning to see a little bit of demons when we come to Nimrod. We see more and more as we progress. And when we come to Mystery Babylon, that city is called City of Demons. So it's less of men, but more of demons. So God seems to be focusing his descriptions more on spirit layer. So naturally, God wants us also to think in line with scriptures. So we should be fully aware and intercept and interpret the spiritual layers as well as physical layers. That's what I see as we progress from Genesis towards Revelation.